I don't ever clap for a speaker before he speaks. You better wait. At least we'll change accents a little bit. And you know, you may be thinking, and I want to get where everybody can see the screen because the pictures are worth a lot more than what I can say. And you may be thinking, why some funny talking yahoo from Arkansas to come up here and tell us how to farm? And I can assure you I'm not here for that. I don't know anything about farming in your state to speak of. I don't know. I'm not even here to talk about specific herbicides and things like that. You guys have local people that are much better suited to do that than me. I'm also not here because you don't have a good weed science program in your state at your university. I know those guys, especially Mike Owen and I, go back a long time. I'll talk about him a little bit more as we go through the talk. I'm just here, and somebody said there it is, here to basically give you guys some insight into how we've destroyed the world's greatest herbicide technology in the South, and how I see you guys following us right down that same road. And so hopefully I can take some of what's happened to us and try to relate it to kind of what I see going on up here. I mean, I'm going to try to scare the hell out of you first, and then we'll get down into to talk about some of the things. What do you need to do to get this thing turned around? I'm a very frustrated weed scientist because I've spent most of my career always having new and better things than we had before to talk to you about. And realistically now, a lot of our weed control programs are back more like things we were doing in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And to me, that's the wrong direction. I'm just frustrated at a lot of the complacency and a lot of the things I just see happening, and we'll ferret some of that out as we go. I don't talk a lot about myself, but I spent my first life in a faculty position at the University of Arkansas, a very applied research extension type role. I've worked with farmers all my life. That's all I really cared anything about doing. The last 10 or so, more like 12 years now, I retired in 2002 and have just been in the private sector since then, just having a barrel of fun doing this without, I tell a lot of people now, the only incompetent administrator I got to deal with is me. And my wife fires me 2 or 3 times a week, but she always hires me back. I've got a history with this one weed I'm going to talk to you about called Palmer amaranth, but really you can just pretty much group the amaranths together. You know, right now it's more Palmer amaranth for us and water hemp for you guys. We're getting some water hemp, especially in our bottomlands. You guys are going to get Palmer amaranth. You already are. I think we'll see that as we go. And when I went to work at the University of Arkansas, we were a Cuckleburn Morning Glory state. We had been a grass and pigweed state, but it was a different pigweed. And Treflan and Lasso and Dual and those herbicides back in the day had pretty much solved that problem. So what did we get? We got Cuckleburns and Morning Glories taking their place. I was actually taught by well-meaning professors when I was in school that we would not have herbicide resistance because weeds couldn't make generations quickly enough. What we would just have would be a species shift to something that herbicide wasn't effective on. The end result's the same. I mean, you wind up with something you can't kill. But my boss, my job was to get the cuckleburrs out of the soybeans on Highway 67 when I was hired. Now, I don't know what Highway 67 had to do with anything because we got a lot of highways in Arkansas. But anyway, we set up all of our research programs to look at cuckleburrs and morning glories and soybeans, because if you couldn't control those were the so-called driver weeds back then. And but I was doing a grower meeting in a little town in Arkansas, a crowd about this size, and farmer stuck up his hand at the end and said, "We're not killing pigweeds with Treflan anymore." And I was young and dumb and arrogant right out of school with a PhD, thought I knew everything, and I said, "Well, it's very obvious. You're either not incorporating it right or you're not putting enough." So we kind of went through a little mini course there on how to do that. And next year at the same meeting, I love working with farmers, he just got up at the end and walked right up beside me with my notes from the year before, and he said, "Okay, young man, I did what you told me to do and I grew up again, now what?" Well, that'll bring your arrogance level down considerably in front of about 100 people. And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I got me a little backpack spray equipment now. You give me a half acre in your worst field, and if you'll plant for me and incorporate my treatments for me, I'll come up there and show you boys how to do it." So they did, and I did, and put my University of Arkansas signs all up in it, and was going to get me a little bump on my evaluation, you know, at the end of the year with my boss. Went back about 2 weeks later to admire my work and show them how smart I was, and the only 2 reasons I got out of my truck was A, to pull up my University of Arkansas signs, and B, to tell them to disc it up before anybody else saw it, because I hadn't killed anything either. And that was my first experience with this new weed called Palmer amaranth. Now we're talking back in the late 80s, and it was also my first experience with Roundup resistant, Treflan resistant Palmer amaranth. Scepter came along. And by then we moved a research location up there, not to that field but to another one, because this weed, it impressed us very quickly how it would take a cucumber field, anything. I mean, a 2-year period, there would be nothing out there except Palmer amaranth. It started on our very droughty, sandy soils. It's actually a native of the Sonoran Desert. So it's a very drought-tolerant plant. And at first we thought maybe it would only grow on those kind of soils, but we found out much different. As you'll see as we go through here, it really becomes Godzilla when you get it on good soil. But anyway, Scepter came along. It was kind of the southern version of Pursuit. We thought we'd cut a fat hog, and it lasted 2 years. And now we got Treflan resistant and Scepter resistant Palmer amaranth. And we're thinking, what in the world are we going to do if this thing starts moving off of these sandy soils and doing what it looks like it's capable of doing? And Roundup came along, problem solved for about 10 years. Along about that same time, your weed scientists in your part of the world were saying, you know, we got this new pigweed up here too called water hemp, and it doesn't play fair. It waits till our pre-emergence break down before it comes up, or it waits till we've sprayed our post-emergence herbicides before it comes up, and it's pretty cotton picking shade tolerant, and it'll come through. So there's a lot of similarities between them. I've worked a lot with other resistant weeds, both in soybeans and rice, but the difference was we always had something better coming along to take care of it. So it was a neat thing for weed scientists in the bar at the weed meetings to talk about, but from a grower standpoint, you guys just got very complacent about herbicide resistance, because by the time it happened to you, if it did, we had 3 herbicides coming along better than the ones we were getting resistance to anyway, and I think we're going to see that's changed. Was in on the ground floor of doing the initial work in Arkansas, or all the recommendation development research in Arkansas with Roundup Ready. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done. If I say anything that sounds critical toward Roundup or Monsanto or anything else, it's not meant to be. I have a real passion for trying to save that technology. Folks, it's the world's greatest herbicide technology, and we're flushing it right down the toilet. We've already done that in the South. And you guys are doing the same thing. I was in on the ground floor working with Liberty Link crops 1 year after we got Roundup Ready in our program back in the 90s. So I kind of had a little bit of an inkling what was going on with those two. And back in that day, Roundup Ready went forward and Liberty Link didn't. But back then, they were both better than any technology, head and shoulders better than any technology we had at the time. So what's going on with herbicide-resistant weeds? And I'll tell you from the get-go, some people will tell you, and some of y'all will think, that I give an alarmist-type message, that I give a sky's falling message. I don't mean to do that. The only reason that I'm alarmed, the only reason I think the sky might be falling, is because we can't seem to get smarter than weeds that don't have a brain. And you know, all we got to do is do that, and we can keep the sky up there where it's supposed to be, and we don't have to be an alarmist. But I truly believe if we continue down the road we're going, I mean, we're getting more species all the time, the geography's expanding all the time. You know, in Arkansas, we're not only dealing with the Palmer amaranth, but we got the ragweeds. We got, of course, mare's tail. We don't have mare's tail anymore because Palmer choked it all out. But we've got Roundup resistant ryegrass now that's becoming a huge issue in our state. And all it'll take is one key annual grass. For us, it'll probably be barnyard grass. For you guys, it'll be a foxtail or a panicum probably. But all of a sudden, the world's greatest herbicide is going to become a surfactant. But I think it can be a threat to global food security. I think it can be a threat to high-priced land values. It certainly was in Australia. We can talk about that a little bit as we go. And the other thing is, when you lose the use of a herbicide on a weed, you've lost it forever. People ask me all the time, well, if I do all these things right, when will this Roundup resistance, quote, run out? It won't run out. It's a dominant gene. When you get it, you got it. Those fields in Arkansas that had trephlan resistance in the early 80s still have trephlan resistant pigweeds in those same fields today. And we probably went 10 to 15 years in those fields with no trephlan being used, and probably 10 years in a lot of those fields with very few, if any, pigweeds going to seed. And yet that resistance is still there. Almost all of our pigweeds are resistant to the ALS inhibitors like Classic and Pursuit and that group, those types of herbicides, because we had already built that resistance before Roundup Ready came out. So, you know, once you lose it, you've lost it, and that's why prevention is so important in this thing, and being proactive is so important in this thing. Our last the herbicide boom is now a bust. I mean, for the bigger part of my real life at the university, then we were getting the pipeline was full of new herbicides. I don't even know how many companies you had screening herbicides back then. Now we got about 4. Back then we might have had 20. And you know, we just had merger after merger after merger, but we had trouble getting enough graduate students to feel like we could properly evaluate all the new herbicides that were being thrown at us in time to write recommendations for our farmers before they got registered. Okay, fast forward, and our last new herbicide mode of action is 30 years old. So I mean, if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not worried about this because the companies will come up with something. Well, we're going to have some tools, and Mark, you did an excellent job. I think the most unbiased and balanced job of explaining a lot of these new technologies down there that I've heard anybody do, and that's going to save me some time standing between y'all and lunch a little bit later on in my talk. We're going to have some new tools, but if you're sitting there, what we really need is some new herbicide modes of action. The mode of action is, how does that herbicide work inside the plant to kill it? The last new one was the HPPD inhibitors that you guys use in corn, Balance and Lotus and Callisto, and they're 30 years old. So I mean, if you're sitting here just thinking, oh, these companies have got all this new technology that they're still going to throw out here and bail us out, you better be taking care of some of your own problems, because it just may not happen. And there's probably only 4 companies now even looking for new herbicides, and if they found a candidate today, it would probably be a minimum of 10 years but before it got on the market. So Roundup Ready came along, and I always like to talk a little bit about what it did, and some of you guys that were farming before Roundup Ready know that. You young guys don't, and it's not your fault. But before Roundup Ready, weed control was an art. And a lot of farmers took great pride in that art, and a lot of farmers did it very well. And the ones that didn't do it very good went out of business. And we're starting to see that same thing happen today. The ones that aren't doing it very good are going out of business in the South. But it was simply a miracle technology that changed everything. First thing it did, it raised the bar to 100% weed control. You know, some people say it made good farmers out of bad farmers, and I don't use the terminology bad farmer, but what it did do, it enabled every farmer to get 100% weed control, and we had never had that option before. It changed everything. All of a sudden you could use any tillage practices, any row spacing you wanted to, but the real thing it did that I think a lot of people weren't expecting initially, it brought an efficiency that you guys never dreamed of. All of a sudden you could farm as many acres as you wanted to with the same amount of equipment, the same amount of labor that you had before. Well, all of those are what we have to lose when you lose that technology, and the complacency about that is a real head scratcher. I say that Roundup was the world's greatest herbicide. It's not anymore, in my opinion, because it's failed on too many weeds. My buddy in Australia says we've driven it to redundancy. A lot of people give him a hard time about that statement. What does it mean? We've just done Roundup every Monday morning at every crop that didn't work anymore, is essentially what it amounts to. It's not the farmer's fault, it's all of our faults. I've written a weekly column in the Delta Farm Press for 40 years, and I can't tell you how many articles I've written through the years that said just that. Roundup every Monday morning till there's nothing out there but soybeans and dirt or whatever. And I knew that wasn't the right thing to do, but that's what the research said, and I knew that's what we were going to do. You know, so anyway, and a lot of folks are just having a hard time coming to grips with the fact that easy and cheap when it comes to weed control are basically two words you can just kind of forget about now. And before I get through, you may think I'm up here peddling chemicals and pushing chemicals, but keep in mind, for most of my career, I built a lot of my programs around programs that could help you get equal weed control for less chemical and less money spent. So it's not my nature to get up here and tell you folks you better pour it on, but we're just in a different time and a different place now than we've ever been before. So cheap and easy are just two words that you can kind of get out of your vocabulary when it comes to weed control now. Our situation in the South is basically glyphosate is a grass herbicide for us now, and you really can't even say that because of the ryegrass issue that we're dealing with. And I would predict that our first resistant annual grass would be barnyard grass, because that's our #1 annual grass because of our rice rotation. When that happens, Roundup for us is purely a surfactant. The world's greatest herbicide has purely become a surfactant. We can't build a burn down program around it now because it doesn't control mare's tail, it doesn't control early germinating pigweed, it doesn't control ryegrass, and you can just go down the line. We can't build an in-crop program around it because it doesn't control pigweeds or ragweeds, mare's tail. Again, you can just go down the line. So a lot of our Roundup Ready programs in the South right now, you'd probably never know the difference if the Roundup never was put out there. By the time we do all the other things we got to try to do to control the weeds, bigger part of the time you'd never know whether Roundup was in the tank or not. 2013 better be the wake-up call for the Midwest. You know, most of the time, most of my talks up here the past couple of years, I've been saying, guys, it's going to come if you go down the same road that we've been down. I mean, if I've got to tell you it's here now, I don't, you know, we got problems. And it doesn't matter whether it's Iowa or Illinois or Indiana or where it is, this better be the wake-up call for you guys. I say it'll be a grass herbicide here in 2 years, but especially if we keep going down the road we're going. Glyphosate for us has failed on the driver weeds, and you say, what's a driver weed? That's one, if you don't control it, nothing else matters. You know, people say, well, I got to have glyphosate or Roundup in my program. It controls 200 weed species. So does Palmer Amaranth. So you know, the driver weeds are the one, if you don't kill it, it's going to dominate everything else. I mean, the technology's been devalued even though it costs the same. All of a sudden, you know, we went 10 years just like you guys did and didn't see a weed in the field anywhere. And now we can't find a field probably that you can't find some level of weed infestation in, even though some of our guys are doing a good job managing it. And then I don't think we have as many of the shock and awe fields, John, as we had when you were down there, but a lot of those guys went out of business and somebody else is farming the farming. But we have, in fact, a lot of Arkansas would look like a lot of Iowa right now. If you just look at the water hemp levels of infestation across your fields, a lot of our pigweed fields would look very similar, although we can still find plenty that you'd drive down the road and wonder if there was anything planted out there in the pigweeds. But costs have gone up tremendously. I mean, those $10, $15 Roundup programs now have got $30 or $40 worth of other herbicide in them, or $50, and sometimes have got about that much hand weeding in them in some cases. The big deal is a lot of our guys have got a deer in the headlights look, saying, where's our efficiency going? If we got to do more spray applications, we got to be more timely, we got to do more tillage, these things, and what's my farm going to look like 5 years from now? I mean, am I going to lose that efficiency I gained with Roundup Ready? It's affecting conservation tillage like crazy. A lot of our fields where we've lost the farm, so to speak, one of the ways we found that we can try to reclaim that is with a moldboard plow, if you can find one, and bury the seed as deep as we can get them buried, and then not stir them up again, and try to give that guy a fresh start and see if we can get it right the second time. Affecting rental agreements like crazy. I mean, farms are being taken away from people every day on a routine basis. Landlords that can't rent farms to good farmers because they don't want to come in and take over the mess the last guy left. I don't know where this affected land values yet, but I can tell you this, the investors that are buying big blocks of land in the Mississippi River Delta are hiring consultants to come evaluate the weed and the weed resistance issues on those farms before they go. Now, I don't know whether it's keeping them from buying them or not, but I know for a fact that that's happening. And I can tell you in Australia, and we'll talk about this in and out a little bit more, but resistant ryegrass basically drove their land values in Australia and their western wheat belt basically down to nothing at one point in time. So I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. This field, I like to tell some stories here and there, and I got called to that field about 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't know with the light level, well the lights, if that one light right there was out, it might help a bunch if somebody, but I got called to that field, and you know, he didn't get there overnight, so it made you wonder what he was thinking or doing the year or two before that, or didn't get there in 1 year. But that's 24-inch pigweed and 2 trifoliate soybeans, and he planted into them like he always had. And I sprayed them with a quart, nothing happened. Sprayed them with a half a gallon, nothing happened. Sprayed them with a gallon, nothing happened. Called a good weed doctor out there with 40 years experience and said, "Doc," kind of looked around like somebody else might be listening, and he said, I don't care whether it's labeled or not, I know you know something that'll get me out of this. And I said, "Yes sir, I do. It's called a disc, and it'll take 4 applications." Wasn't a good day. I mean, he wasn't happy with me. I wasn't happy because I didn't have an answer, and I've always been used to having answers. But unfortunately, that happened, and it's happened in way too many fields. We were disking up fields again this year. I like this guy. If you look close there's a row of dead soybeans and a row of live soybeans and a whole bunch of pigweeds. And I went by that field when the V2 soybeans had just been killed. And I didn't know the guy. I just thought, well, one of 2 things that happened here. A guy either got in a Liberty Link field with Roundup, or he got in a Roundup Ready field with Liberty. And that's been a big pushback. We can't manage 2 technologies on our farm. Get used to it. You're going to be managing more than 1 technology on your farm. You may be managing more than 2 technologies on your farm. And I can also tell you from experience, all you got to do is get in the wrong field 1 time, and that's a life-changing experience, and you'll figure out how to keep them straight from then on. I mean, you got all kind of mapping systems available to you now. You got colored flags, you got the stop signs that they were using here. You'll figure out how to keep your field straight. But the other thing that's happened more often than that for us is a guy had just let it get away from him like the first guy did, and he's either gone out there and disked it up or burned it down and started all over. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of our Liberty Link beans have been planted. Now, that's a great way to introduce a new technology, is sticking it in jungles like that. But anyway, that's what had happened here. He had gone down and burned the field off and replanted into it. The new beans were just coming up. And I contacted a Bayer buddy of mine, and I said, "You ought to go find out who that guy is. You might get you a success story there. You know, a farmer fails and Roundup Ready, plants Liberty Link, cuts 50 bushel beans, and mama gets a new car and everybody's happy." And so he goes and finds a guy, and sure enough, that's what had happened, except when he asked him, he fluffed his old feathers out, and he said, "Well, I assume you planted it back to Liberty Link?" And said, "Nope." Said, "I heard them Liberty Link beans had a yield drag." Said, "I planted it back to Roundup Ready, but this time I put out a pre-emerge." Well, guess what? The pre-emerge didn't work, and he didn't put a combine in the field, and that's a yield drag. But that's how hard-headed a bunch of our guys have been to turn loose of a cocaine addiction to cheap, easy weed control. And the denial phase lasts at least a couple of years. And up here, what I hear all the time is, Said all them dang water hemp, we had that wet year, they all come up after we sprayed and this and that. Well, didn't y'all go about 10 years when there wasn't any water hemp coming up after you sprayed? I mean, that, you know, that ought to be some bells and whistles going off there somewhere. And so you don't have to have them tested. I can save you having them tested to find out if they're Roundup resistant or not. That's very commonplace. Although I don't see us doing as much of it now as I've done the past couple of years. I really think that the bait for some of this new stuff coming out has kind of sent a message to our farmers that the cavalry's coming again, so we can just kind of back off and relax, and this new Extend or some of the other stuff y'all were talking about this morning will be here and save the day for us again. They spent about $100 an acre chopping in that field before they gave up. And that's kind of dear to my heart because I grew up in a little cotton farming community, and my daddy was a VOAG teacher, and I grew up chopping cotton. We actually had a split summer vacation in school where we got out early to chop cotton. And then when you guys were out, we went back to school in a hot part of the summer in an unair-conditioned schoolhouse. And then when y'all got out in the fall or went back to school in the fall to go play football and whatever, we got out, we didn't have football. We got out to pick cotton. And chopping cotton and picking cotton in the Vietnam War are three reasons I'm standing here, because those three things motivated me to go to college. But anyway, so now, I didn't know I was going to be a weed scientist then, and I don't think chopping cotton had any influence on that decision in my life, but I grew up chopping cotton. I've been through the herbicide boom as a weed scientist. I've been through Roundup Ready, the world's greatest herbicide technology, and we're back to chopping again. Is there something wrong with that picture? I mean, if y'all don't think there's something wrong with that picture, there's something wrong with your thinking. I mean, that's another reason I'm a very frustrated weed scientist, because things are going, like auctioneer said, you know, prices are supposed to go up, not down. And technology is supposed to go forward, not backward. But, and you know, if you follow us down that road, Google rogue hose. I mean, you know, hose and hoeing, we called it hoeing back then. That's before they come politically incorrect terms, so it's chopping now. But if you Google Rogue Hoe Company, and that would sound like a pretty politically incorrect company, but they exist. You'll find them on the internet. They make hoes out of disc blades and with big old hickory handles in them, and they're the only ones that'll stand up to chopping pigweed. In fact, I had never heard of them either, and it was actually a chemical company, a Bayer rep, that had been located in South Texas that was telling me about them. And he was saying they were using them in Mexico because they didn't do GMO stuff down there. And that's where he saw these hoes being used. And I got to thinking about it later, and I thought, well, you know, I'd like to have a couple of those to use in my talks. Of course, you can't take them on an airplane. But anyway, I called him and left him. I just called him and left him a message. I'm a pretty plain-spoken guy, and I said, can you send me a couple of those Mexican hoes? And I said I'd like to have one for home, and I'd like to have one to take on my trips to the Midwest. And dead silence. I never heard anything. And he calls me about 2 weeks later, and he said, we need to talk about that message you left me. But anyway, if you Googled them the last couple of years, you would have got a pop-up message on the internet that says that if you Google their field hoe, which is the one everybody likes, you'd have got a pop-up message that said these are back-ordered indefinitely due to unexpected demand in the South. Now, folks, I'm not proud of that. But that's the message you would have got. But you don't, and I also tell people, if I can't convince you today, your crop's laid by, make a trip to the South. I mean, I-57 right down through the middle of Illinois will be a pretty eye-opening experience, but then hit I-55 and go to Memphis. Take your family to Memphis. I mean, do Graceland and Ducks to Peabody and all of that stuff. If you got a permit to carry, I'd say carry, but go. And you'll come home with a different outlook, and if you'll call me ahead of time, I'll make arrangements to get you in a chopping crew. I know y'all talk about walking beans, but you ain't done what we're doing yet. But that crew right there is in north central Indiana, so you don't have to go all the way to Arkansas to find a chopping crew to practice in if you think you need some. That field is water hemp around Effingham, Illinois, about 2 years ago now, at least 2 years ago. There's my good buddy, Dr. Owen, from Iowa State. Now, Mikey and I, if you run into us in the bar and we're talking philosophically about weeds, you'll think we're fixing to fight. Because philosophically, sometimes we can be pretty far apart, but we're kind of like brothers. We'll fight each other, but nobody else better mess with the other one, you know, kind of guy. So, I mean, I think the world of the boy. But this is a field day 2 years ago at Story City, and he's going through his presentation. He's holding up his hands to try to keep the weeds at bay in the south, and he's also explaining to me why you guys have just enough diversity up here to keep the problem from getting as bad up here as it is in the south. And this is in a farmer's field, and I'm thinking, turn around. I mean, there's something wrong with the picture here. And also, I've always called water hemp a wimpy pigweed. I didn't know they grew that big, but we don't have any soils this good in Arkansas either. So, I mean, that's what happens when you put a weed will grow on poor soil, but it really likes good soil. So anyway, that's in Iowa. That's my little wife there in front of a Palmer pigweed plant in Collinsville, Illinois. That's what Palmer amaranth will do when you put it on good soil. That guy didn't put a combine in the field there. That one is in Indiana. I've got a John Deere tractor collecting habit and haul 3 or 4 loads of tractors with a semi to Polk sale in Indiana every year. And I got off of we took a different route coming back one day, and first thing that happened going into Indiana last year, when I would cross the Illinois line on Highway 24, as soon as like there was a barrier at the Indiana border for water hemp. Water hemp in Illinois, as soon as I crossed the line, it was all mare's tail and giant ragweed. Last year there was water hemp out the kazoo. And that's kind of what threw me off on this picture here, but I kept driving down the road thinking, that looks like Palmer. And I kept thinking, no, can't be. And it wasn't just in one field. And so I went back up there a couple of weeks later to speak at a field day, and I went back to that field, and sure enough, it was Palmer. Well, they got Palmer now confirmed in 22 counties in Indiana. It's Palmer's confirmed, and I don't know how many counties now in Illinois. I'm not sure how many in Iowa, but I do know you have it confirmed in Iowa. And and it'll solve your water hemp problem for you too, by the way. What the hell look there with that guy is in southern Indiana about 3 years ago. So my point is, it's not just a southern problem anymore, and just driving up here, I mean, like I said, a lot of your fields don't look a lot different than our fields if you sort of took out some of our shock and awe ones. So now, where do you do? What do you do and where do you go? One misconception is that the best management practices to prevent the problem are different than the ones you got to use after you get the problem. No, they're exactly the same. You've only got so many tools in your toolbox. You've only got so many residual herbicide options. You've only got so many trait options. You've only got so many rotation options. So you got to do the same things to prevent it that you do to fight it after you get it. The only difference is if you prevent it, you keep all your tools useful. You don't lose Roundup Ready if you prevent the problem first. And then the other thing is, and sometimes I want to choke some of my university counterparts. In fact, well, I won't name the university. It's a Midwestern university that's not Iowa State. Just put out a really neat fact sheet on Palmer amaranth, and under their control methods, it says you might want to consider Liberty Link in your worst fields. Now that's proactive weed management at its absolute worst. That's a bunch of PhDs, which by the way, a PhD don't do nothing for you except sometimes help you get a job you might not have got otherwise. But anyway, it's some of those same guys. I hear them all the time. I hear farmers say, well, we ain't seen a problem. I guess if I do, I'll change my program. Or I hear university guys get up and say, we're not having much of a problem in this area, but now if you start seeing some escapes, you better change your program. No, you made the point this morning, it's too late. You should have changed your program 2 years ago. And why is that? I call it the power of one. I always introduce everybody, that's not really Elvira, that's Elvira's first cousin. But they had Elvira at a meeting in Arkansas about 3 years ago they called the Pigposium of all things. This Palmer Amaranth thing had blown up so quickly that they had a meeting, a bunch of university guys, and actually several state universities went together to have this meeting to talk about one weed, and they were hoping to get 200 people there, and 800 showed up. Made it real interesting for the caterers sitting back here looking at this guy. But anyway, they gave away a shotgun. They had Elvira on display. And that big old Mama Palmer, female Mama Palmer that growing out in the open somewhere. And gave away a shotgun to the person that guessed closest to the number of seeds she made, and it was 1.8 million. And I can assure you it was a graduate student that counted them. It wasn't a professor. I mean, sometimes you have to explain the difference. And but anyway, every pigweed is not, or water hemp is not going to make 1.8 million seed. But what one of our professors did is he wanted to simulate the seed drop from one resistant weed that goes to seed in your field, probably one you never even see. And he also wanted to simulate the hard-headed farmer that wouldn't change his program. Now, I know it was an Arkansas farmer. I'm sure y'all don't have any of those up here, for sure not any in this room. But what he did, he just went out in 4 5-acre blocks of cotton on an experiment station, and don't get lost, I know y'all don't grow cotton, but it wouldn't have mattered what the crop was. He seeded 20,000 highly resistant pigweed seed in a meter square area the year before to simulate the seed drop from that one resistant weed that went to seed. And so what did it look like the first year? And he just used normal tillage practices and everything, so the spot was a little bigger than a meter now because he'd worked the field, but he had a spot. Y'all see spots in any fields? Anywhere you see a spot, that's where one resistant weed went to seed the year before. You can just take that to the bank. And the science in rotating technologies is you nip that in the bud. If that guy had a rotated, say, to Liberty Link, for example, or back to corn and done something different or whatever, the year before that spot wouldn't be there. But then you come along and you hit the spot with the combine, or in this case a cotton picker. Combines are great weed seed spreaders, and all that sudden that spot's a streak through the field. So we just started noticing our fields weren't quite as clean as they had been, and we didn't think anything about it. And then we started seeing spots, and everybody just thinking, you know. Next year we started seeing streaks. Some guys started registering, other guys said, cotton picking co-ops wide swathing again. You know, they're bad about that. They had to dismiss it, and I'm not picking on you co-op guys. But anyway, didn't want to believe it. Again, denial, denial, denial. And so the next year, it looks like that. They found in those 5-acre blocks, they found 1 bowl of cotton when they bush hogged it. That's how quickly our farmers got put out of business. We saw the scattereds we didn't think anything about. The few more start showing up in the ditches and the edges we didn't think anything about. We saw the spots, we saw the streaks. The next year they didn't put a combine in the field. And that's how quickly you guys will get ahead. So why are we failing? Very simple reason that we can't seem to switch from reactive weed management to proactive weed management. I went to the Global Herbicide Resistance Challenge in Australia last February, and the fact of the title would tell you it's a global problem. It's not just a Midwest or a U.S. problem. And probably had a cross-section of the best weed scientists in the world there. I don't put myself in that category. I was the only redneck weed scientist there. But I did give the opening paper that afternoon, and I said, folks, you got 200 research papers around this room, posters around this room. You're going to have another 200 oral presentations given in the course of this week. Most all of those on the reasons the herbicides had failed. But I said, if we can't do something as simple is get agriculture thinking proactive weed management, nothing that's going to be done at this conference this week is going to amount to a hill of beans. And I firmly believe that. The other thing is, and Steve Powell's my friend from Australia, I was with him a couple of weeks ago in the Midwest, and he said, Ford, I finally figured out what your problem is. He said the U.S. farmer doesn't fear herbicide resistance. And he's exactly right, because we've always had easy answers. And you can use fear as respect or ever how you choose to want to use that word, but until we start respecting a weed like water hemp and Palmer amaranth, if we're not careful, 10 years down the road, we're not going to have any weed control technology. He said the Australian farmer fears it because we were in the eyelash of losing our entire wheat industry in the western wheat belt in Australia, and that's the only agricultural industry we got. And he said it also drove our land values to nothing, because he said, I bought a 15-acre farm because the land got so cheap that I felt like I could afford it, and I also felt like I knew how to control the weeds on that particular farm. So, you know, too many folks just don't get it. Too many university folks don't get it. I mean, you got a lot of them with an academic interest, but you don't have very many of them with a sense of urgency at the grower level as to what this thing is fixing to do to us. Fierce market competition. I mean, you know, hell, no bones about it. Monsanto has had 100% of the herbicide market and the seed market. They're not going to give that up easily. I mean, they're a great company. I have nothing but respect for them. They're not going to give that market up easy. I mean, even down to the retail level. I mean, you guys have got markets and things and choices and things you like to do that you don't necessarily want to give up easily and change. You know, failure to get everybody on the same page. And every talk I make, I say we need more leaders. And I've just been tickled at the leadership that you guys are showing. And like I said, I was very impressed with the comments you made this morning. I just thought that was the most unbiased presentation across the new technologies that I've heard anybody say. But what we've had at home is you got people like myself and the university people and even some key industry people saying you need to get proactive, and then you got other people coming along right behind. No, you don't need to do that. I mean, just add a pre-emerge or this new extend will be here 2 years from now. We'll solve all your problems for you. And we're getting too many mixed messages sent. I mean, somehow we need to try to get industry all on the same page. So what are some of the keys if you guys want to turn this thing around and keep from going totally where we've been? The first one is you're going to have to focus on your soil seed banks. And I'll break these down a little bit, and I'm standing between y'all and lunch, and we won't take a lot more time. And the other one is you heard them talking about this morning, use a residual. I'm going to say you got to go beyond use a residual and use residuals. And we'll talk about that a little bit. You got to take advantage. I mean, your alternate crop is going to be corn, obviously, and I think that's one reason you're behind us. Corn is a good rotation crop, but you've got some herbicide modes of action like atrazine and the HPPD inhibitors and whatever that you can utilize in corn that you can't utilize in soybeans. So you got the opportunity to get some of your selection pressure off of Roundup or even off of Liberty in your corn crop. You know, you're going to have to rotate traits, because the only way you can get alternative post-emergence modes of action in your program, the only thing right now you got on a Roundup-resistant water hemp is a PPO inhibitor like Cobra or Blazer or Flexstar. And we're running those right off of the cliff too. And then the timing thing. So if you don't take any other thing I say home today, focus on your soil seed banks. Just look at where all you see water hemp growing and going to seed. And what happens, you look at all these fields out here now that got scattered infestations of water hemp across them, probably not going to be a yield loss in them. So you're going to think, well, it didn't hurt anything. Yeah, but look what you did to your soil seed bank. I mean, you added a ton of seed back in the soil, and then next year, what if you don't get a timely rain on your residual or whatever? It's just the way the thing blows up in your face, and then 2 years down the road, you look back and say, where in the crap did they all come from? The other thing you get when you get a high soil seed bank is you get multiple flushes all season. Your residual did a lot, but it didn't do enough. And so you get the cotton picking things just keep coming. And then the other thing you get is a rapid increase in chances of failure of your next new technology. And we're going down a road using up our technologies one at a time, and we're not getting any new ones. Arithmetic's all wrong if you're a young guy that wants to farm the rest of your career. So you can manage your soil seed banks a lot of ways. I mean, herbicides is one, obviously. I mean, low soil seed banks, just changing your programs, you know, may be enough. We're having to do a lot more tillage, but look at all of your field edges, your turn rows, your watersheds, the spots out in the middle of the fields that drowned it out. You don't see a lot of these fields you drive by, you don't see a water hemp in them anywhere except some drowned it out spots that could have been disc up before they went to seed. We see a lot of that at home. We got a lot of fields at home. If a guy just mowed one width all the way around the field, the beans aren't going to make it there anyway. He would have got rid of 90% of the soil seed bank he's going to put back in the ground. Hand weeding, I hate to say it, but I'm afraid we're going to have to do some of it. A buddy of mine called one day this summer and he said, "Doc, what you doing this afternoon?" I know him pretty well. He said, "Come out," said, "we're going hog hunting." And of course, knowing those guys, I knew adult beverages would be involved, and I'm thinking, and y'all don't have feral hogs. That's the only other thing you need to go with the weed problems you're getting. But if you can come shoot some of ours, but the first thing you learn about hunting feral hogs is they're very nocturnal, and they get even more nocturnal after they've been shot at. So I said, "Y'all's hogs coming out in the daylight?" And he said, "No, we're going hog weed hunting." He said, "One day a week, we load the back of the truck with a cooler, and we ride every turn row, every field road, every field on this farm, and if there's a pigweed sticking up out there anywhere, somebody goes and pulls it while the rest of us drink beer and watch it." But anyway, do anything to prevent weed seed production. You got to get focused on the soil seed bank, and if you're getting a few more weeds in your field every year, that better be a big alarm that's going off in your head. Residuals, you got to use them. But a lot of people are boiling it down to being as simple as just use a residual. It's not that simple. I mean, residuals weren't the answer before Roundup Ready. I mean, if you think about it, if what we were doing back before Roundup Ready had been working, Roundup Ready wouldn't have taken the market by storm in 2 years when everybody was mad at Monsanto. I mean, I don't know how it was up here, but in Arkansas, everybody was cussing Monsanto all the way to the dealership to fight over every bag of seed. The dealer was cussing them. They were cussing them all the way home. But it was simply technology that was head and shoulders better than anything we'd ever had before. But residuals fail for too many reasons. If it don't rain, they don't work. If it rains too much, they play out too quick. I mean, get your soil seed bank numbers up, and 95% weed control is a crop failure, and trust me, that changes everything. And 95% weed control now is going to be more the norm than the hundreds that we've been used to dealing with in the Roundup Ready heyday. And plus, we got multiple resistance in water hemp to a lot of the herbicide modes of action that we're using as residuals. So just use a residual, yes, use a residual, but that's not the total answer. I just put an example up here of what I call overlapping residuals, and that's what we're having to do at home. Some people call it stacking, some people call it overlap. Please don't write the individual products down because they may not fit here. I don't even know whether y'all use some of these same things or not, but they're just examples of what a lot of our guys are doing. We'll go out a couple of weeks before planting with a Valor type product of some kind. I like that because if we get a rain on it, we're planting into an activated treatment. And rainfall is more of an issue for us. Of course, people used to tell me up here, we always get our residuals activated. Did you last year? You can't depend on Mother Nature. So, and then we'll come back with some other mode of action or a couple of modes of action as a pre-emerge or maybe a pre-plant incorporated or whatever. And then we're also adding residuals like dual or metolachlor or warrant. I like prefix with our first either Roundup or sometimes even our first Liberty application. But we're doing that for two reasons. One, we're hoping we get some of them activated, but the other thing we're trying to do is get another one to kick in before the first one played out. And I used to think we didn't need to do that in our Liberty links, and I've changed my mind. We don't have to do it so much for control, I think, as we do preservation of that technology. And then beyond that, you guys have got 4 bullets left. And you know, there's 3 things that bother me greatly in my career. The first one is our last new herbicide mode of action being 30 years old. The second one is, I think I can stand right here today and see all of the weed control technology you're going to have for at least the next 10 years. I hope I'm wrong on that. And these were pretty thoroughly discussed this morning, and they'll be stacked and all kind of different things done with them. Every company will have their pitch on why it's going to be the only one you need or why it's going to be the best and all of that. But the other thing about those, the third thing that bothers me, is most of the research on all of these new traits has been done under such strict secrecy agreements at our land-grant universities that our land-grant weed scientists can't get up here where I'm standing and talk about them to you and say anything that the company hasn't given them permission to say. Don't get me started on that. I've had a language problem all my life and I'm not proud of it. I've worked on it hard this year, but that one will get me going pretty quick because I'm still a creature of the land-grant university, and I think that's just a bad deal. But anyway, that's what we got. And if we go down the road using those up one at a time, my concern is somebody's going to be standing here 10 years from now with not a lot of herbicide information to give you guys. So I think how we manage them is going to determine whether we have anything left. If you're sitting there trying to choose which one you're going to go with, we hadn't learned anything. That's our problem now, is we chose one and we stayed with it too long. I'd love to think the companies could work together instead of try to kill each other off. I'm going to have to see it to believe it, but I think that's critical. If somehow our chemical companies could work together to try to preserve the technologies that we have left. Just a couple of slides on Liberty Link, and the only reason I'm going to talk about it because it's the one that's here now. And again, I thought you guys did an excellent job of putting it in, I thought, the proper perspective this morning. To me, there's only two foundation herbicides, and my definition of a foundation herbicide is one that's capable of standing alone. Now, that doesn't mean it's the best way to use it, but Roundup was obviously capable of standing alone, and we used it that way too long. Liberty Link is basically capable of standing alone, but I hope that's not the way you choose to use it. So we've already gone through the first one. And so now we've got one foundation herbicide left, in my opinion, and Liberty's the second best herbicide I've ever seen. Roundup was the best, and it ain't working anymore in way too many situations. It's been our key to survival in the South because Roundup is too late for us to try to save it. And I don't know what we're going to do when Liberty fails for us, and the way we're using it, sooner or later it's going to. I think it's you guys' key to start now to preserve what you got left of Roundup. So you guys can use Liberty to save Roundup and turn around and use saving Roundup to preserve Liberty. We're past that point in the South. I think it'll be the key to dicamba 2,4-D and the HPPDs. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said add one of those to Roundup and hopefully you got Roundup ready again. It's too late. That's not going to happen. I think it's too late for Roundup to carry those new traits forward. I think it'll be in the mix. I think it needs to be in the mix, but I think going forward, any tank mix that or trait mix that doesn't have both Roundup and Liberty in it is going to have one hand tied behind its back, and that is if we don't blow the Liberty technology before these new ones, and like you said, we don't know when they're going to be here. That's just a Liberty Link plot, and that's not in Arkansas. That's in Indiana. Palmer Amaranth in Indiana in a farmer's field, and if you don't think it likes good soil, and that was just a pre-emerge followed by 2 applications of Liberty. The technology is good. In fact, I would submit that it's as good. If you look at a label rate of Liberty, a label rate of dicamba, a label rate of 2,4-D on pigweeds, they're surprisingly similar. They're all three pretty good up to 6 inches, and they're all three pretty poor after that. So I would submit it's capable of 100% weed control, and you can't do any better than that with one of the new ones. You better be thinking about stewarding Liberty probably before you may have ever used it on your farm. I mean, we've only stuck it in the high soil seed banks in Arkansas. We've only put it in the disasters. And you got to get the soil seed bank numbers down. We're trying to get our guys to moldboard now, in addition to putting Liberty Link out there the first year to try to drive the soil seed banks down. We're trying to get our guys to overlap residual herbicides with our Liberty Link programs for a stewardship. We're trying to get them to tank mix PPO inhibitors like Blazer with it or Prefix with it for stewardship. And we're also trying to teach them that a 2 to 4 inch weed is not a 24-inch weed. I mean, you know, our guys have just gone out there, like you said, and tried to kill stuff this tall, and then they say, well, this stuff ain't near as good as you told me it was. Or you go out and go out on a guy's Roundup Ready. We got some clean Roundup Ready beans at home. It's not like you got to plant Liberty Link to have a clean field. It's a management strategy. But you know, you go out and the guy in the Roundup Ready field, and he's put out 3 residuals, and he's added 2 other herbicides post-emerge with his Roundup, and you go over to his Liberty Link, and he sprayed it twice with Liberty, and the first time when they were that big, and he said, man, my Liberty Link ain't as good as my Roundup Ready. No, it's not going to be if that's the way you choose to use it. Learn how to use a new technology, and these guys can help you. Timing is going to be everything again. I don't care what technology you stay in. If you stay in Roundup Ready and try to do it with the Flex Stars and Blazers and all that, you better be spraying 2 and 3 inch weeds. If you're going to go to Liberty, you need to be spraying 2 to 3 inch weeds. Some folks use a Coke can, some folks use an ink pen, but the problem is they'll grow 2 to 4 inches a day in 90-degree weather. So you call your co-op guys when your weeds are 4 inches tall and tell them they need to spray and the books are full. Or you're doing your own spraying and you go out Friday, they're 2 inches tall, and you say, I don't want to waste a treatment today, I'll wait till Monday. And you go back Monday, they're 8, or it rains and you don't get there till next Friday, they're 24. So we're going to have to learn about timing again, and whatever you got to do to get things sprayed timely on your farm, whether that's buy more equipment, whether the people you use buy more equipment, or whatever you got to do to spray timely, you won't survive if you can't. So, just to summarize, I mean, it's proactive diversity. It's just you decide what the weeds are going to do instead of letting them decide. And I'm going to tell, if I got time to tell 2 stories, I don't think I stayed within my time limit, but I'm going to just talk about a couple of farmers that kind of summarize what I've tried to say. The first one is an Iowa farmer, and that field day that Dr. Owen was holding up his hands like that was summer before last. And there was about 3 or 4 PhDs on that program, and something about getting one of these things makes you think, you know, you do have to talk to somebody at least an hour before you can teach them anything, and most of the time they've turned you off in about 10 minutes. But, you know, that's kind of what we had done that day. Well, the next day they had a media panel, and I was one of the speakers, and the next day they had a media panel, and we were up there in your, what is it, your Johnny Orr room in the Coliseum or something, pretty impressive. And they were asking us questions to the panel that had spoke the day before, but they also added an Iowa farmer to that panel. And he spoke last. And he said, what are you doing about resistant weeds on your farm? And he said, well, first, I don't think I have any. And he said, second, I'm managing my farm like I do to keep from getting them. That's it in a nutshell right there. But he said, I'm in a corn-soybean rotation, which shouldn't be a surprise. And he said, in my corn, I try not to use any Roundup or Liberty unless I have to. He said, I will if I have to, but I try to use alternate modes of action in my corn that I can't use in my soybeans. And that's not a one-shot wonder either. That's overlapping residuals in your corn, just like I'm suggesting you do in beans. But anyway, he said, then if I planted Roundup Ready behind my corn last time, I'm going to plant Liberty Link behind my corn this time. And if I use these 2 modes of action or residuals, or 3 or 4 or whatever, I'm going to try to use different, in my Roundup Readies, I'm going to try to use different ones in my Liberty Link. Now, you've only got so many. But he said, I'm a no-till guy, but I'll till a field if I have to in a minute if I see something I don't like going on out there. And he said, I hand weed my scapes. And I said, that's what I like about farmers. He said, in 3 minutes, what I've taken 45 or an hour or whatever to say. I'm not saying that's your program, but I'm saying that's an example of the kinds of diversity that I think you're going to have. And then as these new technologies come along, see if they're better, see where they fit. But get started now. Don't wait on something that may be here, may not. We may be able to use them, we may not. There's a lot of questions to be answered about some of this stuff. The Arkansas guy, he's an excellent farmer, big farmer, and came up to me about 3 years ago at a meeting and said, "Doc, never had a pigweed on our farm, and last year we had them in 3 fields. But," he said, "I got me a plan." He said, "I'm going to plant," this was in the wintertime, he said, "I'm going to plant corn this year, rice next year, Liberty Link beans the next year. I'm going to go back through corn and rice before I go back to Roundup Ready beans." I was impressed, and especially from him, no, but I was impressed. But I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. I said, "Are you going to do that on your whole 12,000 acres? And he said, "No, I just got the problem in 3 fields." That's the rut we can't get out of. I mean, we're getting closer, but we can't get our guys. It's easy to get a guy to plant Liberty Link beans or rotate to something different if he didn't put a combine in the field the year before. Where we're stuck is we can't get our guys to make those same changes before they get in the ditch or even before they see their first weed in the field. So anyway, I'd take a question if we got time. The farmers are equipment guys. You got to be an equipment guy if you farm. Anybody got an idea what that is? One of the things I didn't talk about that I think you're going to hear more of, and like I told my buddy from Australia, our farmers aren't near ready to hear it yet, but one of the things that they have really emphasized in their see, when they got hold-on resistant ryegrass in Australia, it was resistant to every herbicide mode of action they had, boom, in 1 year. So the only way they could survive was get outside the box. And I'll just tell you, all of your answers in the future are not going to be squirt and look answers. I mean, we're going to have to get outside the herbicide box and outside the herbicide trait box to whip this thing. But they started focusing a lot on what they call harvest weed seed management. And all of this stuff was invented by farmers. The first guy invented a chaff cart. I think they're actually manufactured in Canada, and I can just see all y'all running out to buy one. But they figured out that the ryegrass seed that was coming through the combine, well, they'd have to figure that out, was going in the chaff fraction. And so instead of putting it right back out in the field for next year, they start pulling these little chaff carts and catching the chaff, carrying it out, piling it up, waiting till the next summer and burning it, and burning up the weed seed. And then some guys just started, instead of running spreaders behind the combine, just putting some real simple diverters back there to windrow everything and waiting till summer and burning it. Well, now that program may not work for us, but none of this may work for us. But then the next farmer invented a cage mill system out of the mining industry, and it's called a Harrington weed seed destructor, and that's it. $250,000 and you can get one. We don't even know whether it'll work on pigweeds yet or not, but there's going to be some research done on it. But there's even some hope now that Case IH and John Deere both seem to be somewhat interested in this thing, and there's even a question now that maybe it can be put into the back of the combine. So maybe in the future we're doing some things to destroy weed seed instead of putting them right back out in the field to get to fight them again next year. But just kind of one example of an out-of-the-box thing. And you know, Dr. Powell just looks at me like, y'all are nuts. I mean, why aren't y'all doing all of this stuff? And I said, we're just not there yet. And unfortunately, we're probably not going to get there till all of our stuff quits working. And that's why I'm a very frustrated weed scientist.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baldwin. Let's give him a hand.